Shadows die twice. If I could point at any other reason for the outrage among some fans of the state of the Dark Souls Remaster than the debatably lackluster changes, it would have to be that fans of the Souls series are starved for something new. FromSoft teased us nearly half a year ago with a short trailer that encouraged wild speculation amongst the community. A smart marketing move considering how speculation-based the lore of their games tend to be. Today I'll discuss my thoughts on the coming title for the first time and address new leaks that have come from 4chan. Yeah, I know, take this with a grain of salt large enough to season your meals until we see the release of Half-Life 3. But with games like Rage 2 and Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee leaks ending up being true from the corners of the internet they were unearthed from, I think it's at least worth talking about to see if this video ages well, and it does start a discussion. Of course, there's really no footage to show, so forgive me while I continue to stick random Blood Souls footage in the background. Without further ado, let's talk Shadows Die Twice. The game will be Souls-like in gameplay and atmosphere, but also differentiate by being more open world and not having the clear level-to-boss design. There was speculation amongst the community about whether this game would be Bloodborne 2, a new Tenchu game amongst others, but I've always held to the belief that Miyazaki wanted to do something fresh. Of course, speaking as someone who says his favorite Dark Souls game is Bloodborne, I think FromSoft's greater Soulsborne series is something that is truly connected. And it's been my belief that while Miyazaki wants to do something fresh, he wouldn't completely abandon the structure that everybody loves about these games. Keyword being completely. Obviously, the bosses are a huge part of what I love about the franchise. Okay, they're what I fucking adore like a fangirl about the franchise. That said, I'm always welcoming to new ideas and have full belief in FromSoft to execute. If they want to take a Souls-like game open world and have bosses take a back seat, I'm gonna be along for the ride. The game is more open world than the previous titles, but not fully compared to a game like Skyrim. It offers multiple interconnected levels that are much larger with multiple possible paths. I feel as if many games these days are taking this open world approach as technology improves. One of the most tried and true ways to increase the scope of a game is to expand the world that you inhabit. That said, FromSoft has been an expert in level design when they hit it right with areas like Anorlando, Central Yharnam, and the Boletarian Palace. If they open the world too much, I fear they would lose some of the focus that these levels have. On an optimistic note though, this could be interpreted as a big interconnected world like the original Dark Souls, which they haven't fully been able to accomplish since. Except this time the world would be even bigger to make full use of this generation's capabilities. Now that is something I think we would all love to see. Most of the game will take place in rural areas, but there will be a big city to explore later in the game. Not much to take from this other than to give background to the setting. We'll talk in greater detail later about the narrative approach to give context to the world, but at least this shows there will be variety. It could also suggest some sort of twist in design once you reach the city. It will draw inspiration from both Bloodborne and FromSoft's old PS2 IP Kuon. The game clearly has some inspiration from Bloodborne, but to what level we don't know. Thankfully we have these leaks to let our imagination wander. As for Kuon, it's a survival horror game set in a Kyoto mansion. That would make a lot of sense when you consider the Japanese influence the teaser has showcased. Some enemy designs in the atmosphere resemble a modern Kuon, but it has nothing to do with the game or will play anything like it. Further compounding on the previous idea, it sounds like much of their inspiration for the world will be drawn from a Japanese setting, and with the developers having already explored a similar world, it would make sense for them to lend some ideas from it. Enemies will lose their head and limbs in combat, sometimes spawning a parasitic version of themselves. We've seen things like this before with the brainsucker enemy in Bloodborne, for example. If you're telling me the entire game is going to be full of those fuckers, count me out. In reality, this sounds like it could make for some interesting combat strategies as long as they don't overuse the mechanic. If it really is full-on limb destruction combat, then that opens a whole new world of depth for the series. There is a dynamic weather and day-night system for some areas. At night and when raining, enemies appear in greater numbers and are more difficult. In the late game, sunshine can be created only using an item at holy statues. I'm always a fan of weather and time systems in games as long as they make sense and aren't obtuse. This sounds like a great way to shake up the exploration and would be a welcome addition. I just hope those items used at holy statues aren't terribly rare. I would love if they had some interesting way for you to obtain them, kind of like how humanity is largely tied to multiplayer in Dark Souls. Gameplay is similar to Bloodborne, but more vicious and brutal. It's a bit less wild, but still fast. Kind of like a combination of Nioh and Bloodborne. Deciphering this sounds as if they're saying the combat isn't quite as fast as Bloodborne, but isn't as slow and deliberate as Dark Souls. The more vicious and brutal combat would be in line with the limb destruction, which again would make for great depth. Trick weapons make an appearance, but aren't called trick weapons. Some have 3 forms, others have 2 forms, and there are many weapons that are always two-handed or dual-wielded, as there are no sidearms or shields. Trick weapons are legitimately one of my favorite gaming innovations of all time. It would be such a shame to see them limited to Bloodborne, so I would be ecstatic if FromSoft brought them out of their Hunter's Workshop again. Not only did I love their ability to transform, but I love that Bloodborne had less weapons, making each feel unique and like a quality addition to the game. It did reduce build variety to an extent, but that was an exchange I was personally willing to make. Despite there being no shields, you can block and counter with your weapon. Every weapon has a unique counter ability. Sounds sounds similar to Neo, which gives more credence to the idea that the combat would have some sort of inspiration there. I love the idea of being able to parry with your weapon, and especially think the concept of each weapon having a unique type of riposte would be brilliant. Imagine if it wasn't as simple as doing a ton of damage with a unique animation, but if they could somehow involve the idea of weapon arts into the counter system. For example, maybe a weapon could inflict poison through a counter along with a minimal blow of damage. Other counters could do an AoE blast that would slow enemies in the surrounding area for a short time. I love the idea of stepping outside of the parry and massive damage idea, but I'm probably getting carried away with the possibilities. The right arm will be replaced by a multifunctional device that serves as a prosthetic, but can also be used as a grappling gun of sorts to reach higher levels and climb throughout the world. What are we, goddamn bionic commando? If you're telling me I can swing through ancient Japan like Spider-Man, then sign me the fuck up. Really though, FromSoft could use some level of verticality in their games through a climbing and jumping mechanic to add a different flavor, but I hope this wouldn't be too large of a component in the combat. There are skills in the game including different melee moves, passives, and magic. It won't have endless skill trees and skills won't be big flashy moves, just new moves and abilities. Sounds like something similar to Hunter tools in Bloodborne or magical abilities in Dark Souls, but instead of them being pickups, you can add them passively to your character. The idea that your build could have built-in magic would be incredible and would create a lot more variety. This addition would synergize greatly with the quality over quantity philosophy of the trick weapons that would admittedly make for less build variety. There are no proper invasions, but you can enter the world of another player and take control of a monster in their world. The monster is a random creature from the level that gets a slight upgrade, only possible in certain areas. This is where the leaks start to lose me a little bit. Perhaps it's my enthusiastic willingness to believe what I want to hear, and my pessimistic side pushing me to reject that which I don't, but I can't imagine a Souls-like title without proper invasions. The concept they describe of taking control of an enemy creature is interesting, and perhaps there's more to it than I'm initially imagining, but I'd find two big problems. One, that would put the player in the shoes of a single enemy that, albeit a bit more powerful, is designed to be killed easily by the player amongst a crowd of other enemies. Though I have to say it would create for some interesting invasion moments being disguised as an enemy. It could be even more interesting if it doesn't alert a player when you take over an enemy in their world, so they could really sell the fake out. But two and more critical, this would mean a player's build would be meant for only PvE, where a lot of players in this series get satisfaction from making builds to take online against other players. If you can't invade as yourself, there's no way for there to be traditional multiplayer combat. There is no co-op either, with the game focusing more on exploration and less on clear-cut level design ending with bosses. Even further on the previous thought, while this makes sense in the confines of the leak, I still find it incredibly hard to believe FromSoft would limit the ability for players to play together. The online component of making builds and sharing them through jolly cooperation, devilish invasion, or structured battles is a signature part of what keeps the community of these games alive for so long after release. From a sheer business standpoint, I find a large deviation from that formula hard to believe. There are Chalice Dungeon-like rituals that are optional levels that can be discovered and explored within the game's world. They can be replayed and will change despite a basic design. There are about 10 and there is a traditional co-op for these areas. Then again, this makes it a little bit more believable. Perhaps they'll close off multiplayer for only certain areas in the game, but people fucking hated that in Bloodborne because it meant so little variety in the places you could play. Even though most of the Souls games end up with hotspots where most of the multiplayer action takes place, it'd be a shame to limit it instead of letting the community decide where they want multiplayer to happen. Overall, I think there's some interesting ideas here, but I find them hard to believe in practice. The game will take place in a dark fantasy world resembling ancient Japan. It will draw heavily from Japanese mythology with a horror twist, though it will include original ideas. This wouldn't be the first time Miyazaki has taken inspiration from elsewhere, having borrowed themes from Berserk and H.P. Lovecraft before. The story will be centered around an ancient cult that has been using farmers for their dark rituals for centuries. This cult fears a coming apocalypse, so they sacrifice and experiment on humans at a shrine of blood. Many of the enemies in the world will be the result of these experiments. The narrative will focus on a dichotomy of the cult either being evil or knowing a grave truth unbeknownst to those outside of the cult. Most of the members have mysteriously vanished, with only a few left alive. This sounds like a textbook setting for a Souls-like game. A world where something dark happened that turned most of the inhabitants into mindless creatures that kill anything in sight, but amidst the chaos, there are those who maintain their sanity, or do they? The cultist's appearance also sets up for a reveal throughout the game of the cause of their experimentation. What would make them want to be so ruthless toward their fellow man? Perhaps there's a greater evil lurking in the shadows. You start the game as a heavily maimed and disfigured person at the edge of death. You were saved by a mysterious figure who gives you a new face, allowing for character creation. They also replace your missing arm. This sounds like an eerie parallel to the opening of Bloodborne and would definitely set the stage well. Shadows Die Twice will appear at E3 with a full-length trailer and some gameplay. No matter whether all these leaks end up being true or this ends up being a massive farce of speculation perpetrated by a single person, I think there's no doubt that this part of the leak is wholeheartedly true. The thing about these leaks that gain traction is that they often blur the line of being so close to the truth of what we expect that it can be hard not to believe them. From the teaser we've gotten and what we know of FromSoft's development history in the last decade, I find the idea of a game that takes the concepts of Bloodborne, sets it into dark fantasy Japan with horror elements, and introduces new gameplay components and world building that explains what was previously possible to be pretty damn easy to believe. Of course, I find the multiplayer changes a bit harder to swallow, but it wouldn't be the first time FromSoft has made a sweeping change to their formula that wasn't well received initially. It's these creative leaps of faith that lead to innovation though, and I'm completely behind the idea of being open-minded for Miyazaki's next creative vision. I encourage you to be open-minded all the same and not dismiss the game immediately if we find it's a greater than expected departure from Dark Souls. Because if they hadn't had the boldness to create Demon Souls nearly a decade ago, we'd never have gotten the wondrous franchise that is Soulsborne. I will admit that after reading these leaks, I do have a strong desire for them to be the reality of Shadows Die Twice, but I'm convincing myself wildly not to believe everything I hear so I don't end up disappointed. But of course, I'd still love to hear what you think about these leaks in the comments below. I'm going on a week-long vacation to Pittsburgh starting tomorrow, so I wanted to get some kind of edited video out for you all to enjoy. I'll continue uploading both the Hollow Knight and Dark Souls Remastered DeMod-a-Thon in my absence, and you can expect a big Souls video late next week when I return. Thank you all for your support in everything that I do, and I hope you all have a great week while I'm away. I'll be keeping you company as best I can through the DeMod-a-Thons. And of course, thank you all for watching today, much love to you all, and I'll see you in the next video.